Welcome back to another edition of Political Breakfast. It has been a freezing cold start to the week here in Atlanta, but temperatures are starting to warm up again in the 60s. I'm your host, Lisa Rayam, here with our strategist, Republican strategist Brad Robinson, and Democratic strategist Tharon Johnson. Okay, last week our focus was on the November 4th election results. This week, let's look ahead to the governor's race, why don't we? There's a new poll out focusing on the governor's race, which is a very, very crowded race on both sides. Among the Democrats running, former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms shows a clear advantage. On the Republican side, Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones is ahead. Let's sort through this a bit. Any real surprises here? Tharon, you up first.
Yeah, let's start with the surprises. I think the two surprises for me is Jason Estevez is still in low single digits. And in this AJC poll that we're referencing, it actually has Jeff Duncan slightly above Jason. And the others, I think all of whom didn't even, make like 1%. Now, that's a surprise. I think for Jason to have raised $1 million, to have been in the race the longest, and is still in fourth place. And I've seen other polls where he's been in fourth place, third place. That's got to be very concerning for him in his campaign. Jeff Duncan, while he is slightly ahead of Jason in the AJC poll, it's still got a lot of work to do. He is not resonating with Democratic voters, and it's not to be said it. And it's to be expected because he's not a Democrat. He's a Republican. Let's go into what didn't surprise me as much, but it was a little surprising, is that this is a two-way race between Michael Thurmond and Keisha Lance Bottoms. Keisha Lance Bottoms is at 40%. Michael Thurmond is at 11%. But you also have 40% people that are undecided. And so if you think about the Thurmond, Keisha, Lance Bottoms head-to-head match now, if the election were today, that race would go to a runoff, and it would be between Keisha and Michael Thurmond. Then it becomes some different factors. Well, and then I think electability, Lisa, becomes paramount. Who is better for the Democrats to elect in November? And, of course, Democratic primary voters have got to decide who they want to nominate, who we want to nominate as the nominee. And so the other thing that was very interesting in this poll is that while it was done a few weeks ago, affordability was top of mind, cost of living, but also being against Trump. People want fighters. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier in the week, is that John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock know you got to stay strong. People want Democrats not to be perceived as weak. And one of the key tests of whether you're strong or weak is your willingness to stand up to Donald Trump. And I think that's something that Thurmond and Keisha both did in the forum that Brian and I talked to. Every single candidate running for governor on the Democratic side talked about cost of living. They talked about affordability. They talked about health care. But they all of them talked about standing up to Donald Trump. So, again, Thurmond, Keisha, two-way race right now. Electability, who's the best person going to be elected for the Democrats to go against. Jason, Jeff, Derek, Olu, Rua. All of them right now are very, very low single digits. But the race is still early, and there are going to be plenty more polling coming out.
Yeah. What surprised me in an election where if you look at every other poll, the U.S. Senate poll, the Republican side of the governor's poll, no one's anywhere near 40. Mike Collins on the Republican side is at 30. That's the closest one there is in the other polls. Keisha is at 40, and that's what surprised me, that it is that much, because you can argue convincingly that voters just aren't that tuned in right now. So what's happening there? Part of it is some name ID, a concentration of Democratic voters in Metro Atlanta who will be more familiar with a former Atlanta mayor. Also, as we've said here many times, the plurality, the biggest voter group in a Democratic primary is female Black voters. Black voters are a majority, and then of that subset, women are the biggest group of the Black voters.
And so they're showing up early.
Yeah, and they're the ones who are engaged, and there's one person named Keisha on the list of names that are read out, right? And so those voters are hearing a name that they know belongs to a Black female. They may know who she is. They may not. I don't know. I really don't. I can't dig into those numbers because I don't really know. But that right now is a benefit for her. And Tharon and I were on a panel with a Democratic woman in the last week who looked at me and said, Tharon may have heard this, That's a mile wide and an inch deep. And I often disagree with this particular Democrat, but I think on this one, she may be right that's what it is. It's a mile wide and an inch deep. And I think that provides a big opening for Michael Thurmond and for the ones below, Jason Estevez and Jeff Duncan. They both have the chance to get rocket boosters under them and zoom up. I think that a negative message being run against Keisha Lance Bottoms will bring those numbers down if a lot of money is put behind it. I think she is the most vulnerable potential nominee for Democrats in a general election. At that forum that Tharon referenced, Mike Thurmond was certainly the standout performer on the Democrat side. That's not a surprise. We know he's very talented and charming and gifted as a communicator. I thought that Jason Estevez shows that he's got the talent to do it. I think Jason seemed defensive and a little irritated in that forum. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really curious. I'm glad to hear Tharon agreeing. He seemed to be very defensive when asked why he was so low in the polls. Look, it's perfectly rational that a state senator with no statewide name ID, who's never had a TV ad on Metro Atlanta, air at 1,000 points, why he would be where he is perfectly normal. I think the fact that he's up on that stage, getting a chance to make his case, he needs to use those opportunities to be a positive voice for the future. I think that plays into his being the youngest, being at least of the legitimate contenders. He can be the voice of a new generation, a turning of the generational page in leadership. But that's got to kind of be a bright, sunshiny look to some degree, something, to use the charm that he has. And that's not what I saw there in this particular instance. I still think he's in it. I thought Duncan did a great job. And Tharon and I had one big disagreement on this. The host asked him who was his favorite governor, which is a great question. To ask a party switcher, right? Like, what does he say? Does he say a Democrat when we haven't had one in 20 years and he's really not going to be familiar with any of their records and he may be wading into a thicket there? He said Nathan Deal. And Tharon turned to me immediately with this big, big grin on his face. Like, what in the world, And I'm like, I think it's a great answer. I think that's a fantastic answer. I don't know if it's great in the Democratic primary, but I liked it.
Exactly. There you go.
So Burt Jones wasn't there, though.
Burt did not attend. And just to kind of give our listeners some context here, I don't know the AJC. They had to really think hard about this because there were other candidates, and I want to speak up for these folks. On the Republican side, even though B-Rob, has drilled in my head, he doesn't get a lot of, name recognition. But, you have a Clark Dean, and you got two other Republicans who are in the primary. On the Democratic side, Lisa, you have Olu Brown, Derek Jackson, and Rua. And some of those candidates actually made a good point. They're like, well, if you only let 3 on the Republican side come in, because Burt declined, he was invited, then why did you let 4 in on the Democratic side? Because Jason was not higher than Duncan, so it could have been just Duncan, Thurmond, and Bottoms. But to answer your question directly, I'm a little shocked that Burt did not show up because one thing that this poll revealed, and I'm gonna relinquish some time and give Brian some time to get deeper into the Republican.
He's endorsed by the president. He didn't have to show up.
Yeah, he's endorsed by the president, Lisa. And you actually going to make my point, because what we try to do on this podcast is to be rational and logical, but we also always talk about that voters are not paying attention. So the fact that you, a black woman, I don't want to assume you're a Democrat these days, because you just never know. Because let B-Rob tell it, all these black folks are just running to the Republican Party. So I'm going to assume, Lisa, that you are a Democrat, but I'm not going to put you out there like that, because you are our host. You're bipartisan.
There you go.
But you as a woman, a journalist, long time in this state, knows politics better than anybody. If that is your reaction, yes, conventional wisdom would tell you, I got Donald Trump's endorsement. Why would I need to show up? Here's the problem. Is the MAGA brand, I said this last week, and B-Rob agreed with me, is not as strong as it once was. And it definitely did not help on last Tuesday. Second thing is that you have 50% of the people in this poll who are undecided, Lisa. So if the MAGA brand of Trump endorsement was so powerful, Burt Jones should be a little higher. But knowing Burt, because he listens to this podcast, he probably felt defiant that, like, hey, I'm not going to go give these 2 men airtime with me, right? They got a lot of work to do. I got the endorsement of the president. I got $10 million in this leadership committee. I'm in the front runner, and I'm in the front seat in this race. I told B-Rob, I thought Chris Carr, before the forum started, had an enormous amount of swag. Remember, I told you that, B-Rob. I was like, this guy's walking around here like he's just, it was a little bit of, you would have thought, Lisa, that Chris Carr been hanging out with some black dudes. I mean, it was some Jay-Z, Lil Baby,
Tell us your secrets, Chris Carr.
Ludacris. No, it's seriously, it was some Atlanta swag. And so I predicted, back me up on this, B-Rob. I said, man, I didn't call him your boy, but I said, hey, Attorney General has a little swag. I didn't see Raffensperger, so I don't know if Raffensperger had any swag or not. I didn't get a chance to see him. But real quick, before Brian talks about reply, I want to go back to something on the Democratic side. I agree with him, but I respectfully disagree on a couple of things. I think that Thurman did the best. Now, Duncan did okay. Be fully disclosed, B-Rob, I did not get a chance to stay for the entire AG's conversation. But from what I've heard, I heard that he did very well. But I think that if you had to rank it on relatability and conversation with the crowd, who owned the crowd, I think Thurman definitely won the forum. He did the best. Not saying the others did not do good. I don't think Jeff Duncan did great. I don't think he did great. I think he did what he was very rehearsed, very, polished. And yes, I do think the Nathan Deal answer is going to come back and haunt him. Mark my word. I thought Keisha was steady. She was just Keisha, her words, I'm just Keisha. And I do agree with you on Estevez. I think Estevez has a tremendous amount of, it's something, right? He's defensive, he was very Obama-like, but, for him to think that, he's just going to come out the gates and be leading, like you said, I mean, he's never been on a statewide ballot before.
Right.
Yes, he's raised the money. Yes, he's working hard, but it was just a little bit of defensiveness there. But on the last thing on the Republican side is that the way I read the room, though, is based on, it was, shout out to the AJC. They actually spent a lot of money on this event. It was
open bar.
It was
open bar.
Open, Brian loves his open bar, Lisa. Would you put Brian in a room with open bar and some peanuts?
Format. I thought it was a great format. I love it.
You put Brian in a room with some open bar and a little charcuterie board and some chicken tenders.
Some chicken tenders.
He is
nibbling away, nibbling away.
Net sliders. But I think
better
that,
than popcorn, right? It was all better than popcorn.
It was.
Yep. Yeah. But for Burt not to be there, I gotta believe that his team feels like we got the endorsement of the president. We got his money, but I think that he's got to be thinking the MAGA brand, the Trump endorsement, is not as strong as it once was. I mean, it can't get stronger, but right now, on this day, I think that brand, the president, is not as good. But we'll see if he does future forums.
Yeah.
Lastly, give me your take, both of you, on this large swath of undecided voters. Is it because it's so early, or is it because they just don't know? They just don't know, who's what and what they're choosing from at this point.
I think there's a group of Georgians who are tuned in, who are paying some attention. Obviously, the people who download the Political Breakfast podcast are a great example. There are people who are tuned in. But then there's a much bigger segment that's not. And those people don't really know these candidates. There is no Brian Kemp or Donald Trump in this election that everybody knows and has an opinion on. Brad Raffensperger is probably the closest thing that there is as far as somebody that everybody knows and has an opinion on. Brad doesn't have to go get name ID, and people have an opinion on him that spending isn't going to move much one way or the other. People have formed their idea of who he is. Same thing I said about Donald Trump in 2020 and 2024. The spending only does so much. People have made their minds up long before. With Burt Jones not coming, there's a couple of things to take a look at there. One, he is in the lead in this polling at 22%. He does have the president's endorsement. He does have a lot of money that he can spend. He does have the bully pulpit of the lieutenant governorship, where he can have an agenda in January for the session and make some political points in those 3 months. He's got some advantages. And we saw in their messaging that why would we go and do this in front of the liberal AJC, in front of a liberal audience of Democrats? And look, that audience was lean Democrat, no doubt about it. Any gathering of the AJC audience is going to be a lean Democrat audience, and maybe heavily tilted. And that's not a condemnation of the AJC. I think they make every effort to make everyone feel included and wanted there. They personally reached out to me to be there, for example. So but it is a self-selecting group, and conservatives are just much less likely to show up at such a thing. So I understand their perspective. They're like, why would we go and deal with gotcha questions that could create a bad moment that could be used against us when we're in the lead? We don't have to be. The other side of it is you have the most money. You have the second biggest job in the state after the governor, and you have the president's endorsement, the gold standard in Republican politics, and you're only at 22. That's another way of looking at this. Like, their attack on Carr was, you're in single digits, you are irrelevant, you mean nothing, you can't catch us. But I think the other side of it is Mike Collins, who represents 1/14 of the state, doesn't have the president's endorsement, and he's at 30%. So you can't at 22 argue that no one's paying attention if this dude who doesn't have the president's endorsement in the Senate race is getting a higher share of Republican votes. Obviously, those folks have tuned in enough to have an opinion, and he's not the only one. Bertie Carter's at 20-something%. Derek Dooley's now in double digits. He's growing, which is where you want to be when you go from being a zero name ID person. You're going to grow from zero, and that's what we're seeing him do. So 22 is not a position where you can write it out. I mean, he's going to have to go and get in there. I'm not saying it's got to be at an AJC forum. I'm not, it can be any number of forums, but at some juncture, I do think Burt Jones has to get in the ring. And I've explained, I think, fairly his point of view on why he wasn't there. I can make an argument for his point of view if I was internal, and I can make an argument against what they decided to do if I was internal as well, about why you do need to get in the ring and prove you can stand in there and trade blows and walk out standing up to show them you have what it takes. I do think he's still got to go and show that in this campaign somewhere. And I think one disagreement that Tharon and I have, I do think Mike did a great job. I think Chris Carr owned the night. It was my view immediately. He had lines that got the crowd laughing and clapping and really engaged. He was as confident and smooth as I've ever seen him. And if he can bottle that, even though he's at 7% in this AJC poll, I think he could be one to get the rocket boosters under him and take off. And I do want to disclose, I have been a longtime consultant to him. So take that into consideration when you hear my opinion. I've been a longtime consultant to Brad Raffensperger as well, who I think is a great American patriot in his own right.
Yeah, Raffensperger, Carr, there is a lot of name recognition, right, Tharon, on both sides. You've got Keisha Lance Bottoms, you've got, Michael Thurman. So what is your account when it comes to the undecideds? It can't be name recognition, right?
Absolutely, Lisa. Listen, to B. Rob's point, and let's just go ahead and just take our listeners deeper into this. I spend a lot of time in the evenings and the mornings, and I try not to bring up politics with a lot of my friends and colleagues, Lisa, but sometimes people bring it up, right? And so what I think about is that even at some of my dinners and my conversations, whether, I'm out at an event, people are a little less likely to tell you who they're going to vote for at this juncture, right? So I think when you get that poll, whether it's on the phone or it's on text, and they ask you that question, who you voting for, you say undecided, but you have your opinions about people. And so if you look at where Keisha is, let's just call a spade a spade.
It's not safe. It's not safe to tell people anymore.
It's not safe to tell people, right? And they're not going to tell me or Brian because they kind of listen to us. They know where we are. But I try to make people feel comfortable. And what I hear is that exactly what you just said. We know the name. We know her name. We know Michael's name. And Michael Thurman hasn't been on the ballot statewide in 15 years. But even though Keisha and Jason and all the others have never been. Well, back up. Derek Jackson did run for
Lieutenant Governor, I believe.
Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah.
So other than Michael Thurman and Derek Jackson, keep me real here. Keep me honest here, B. Rob. Those are the only two candidates out of the 7 on Democratic side that's ever been on a statewide ballot. But Keisha, being a former Atlanta mayor, being a CNN contributor, being a senior advisor to former President Joe Biden, and just being a former Atlanta mayor, Lisa, it just brings a tremendous amount of visibility for you. Now, but just because they say we're voting for her now based on name recognition and favorability, once the campaign starts to engage, and I like what B. Rob has said, these turbo boosters. Once they start to talk about why they're running and talk about the difference between them and their opponents, then you'll see those numbers start to drop. You know, I think she knows that she probably won't be able to sustain this sort of comfortable lead that she has, but which, by the way, is below 50%. So, yeah, so at this juncture in November, a year out from the general, folks are not that paying attention. That's why you're getting a lot of undecideds. I think folks are going to start paying closer attention to this race at the end of the year. And then when we start talking about polling at the beginning of the year, once, you know, people have gotten through the holidays, you'll start to see it get a little closer. But if you're Michael Thurmond right now, you want to be that guy that's the alternative. If you're Keisha Lance Bottoms right now, you just want to say, look, I got a comfortable lead, raise the money, don't do anything to get me killed. But if you're Jason, Jeff, and everyone else, you're not feeling too good right now about these polling numbers, but it's still early. And to quote something Jason said, right, B. Rob, you were there. He said, "Hey, I'm just stretching. You know,
Yeah,
at this
right.
point, I'm just
athlete.
stretching out, right?"
Yeah.
But what one of the lines of the night was when Tia Mitchell, who was very fair, and I got to say this to Greg Bluestein, Patricia Murphy, Tia Mitchell, they asked these people some tough questions, Lisa. I mean, it wasn't like a just, you know, we're going to just ease into it. I mean, so Thurmond had to answer the experience question, right? But what I liked about what he did is that before she could even bring it up, he brought it up. And he said that
which is the age question, not the experience question. It's the age question.
Yeah, well, the age question,
Yeah.
right? And the experience question then led into the age, right?
Yeah.
Because he actually talked about his experience and he talked about the age. And he said, look, I got the Young Democrats president supporting me, right? And this is a young, outstanding man who's a young leader. And then I think to B. Rob's point, the energy in the room between those four, he clearly had the most energy, the energy that he conveyed, and also the energy he got from the crowd. But you know, look, Keisha, she was disciplined, and I just think that Jeff Duncan, yes, he sounded good, but I'll just save my concern about him to a later date because he's now on the record for saying a lot of things, but apparently he's changed his heart on a lot of things, Lisa. So if you ask him about 10 votes, he'll tell you he's changed his heart on all of them. But I think that there was a lot of things that Jeff Duncan said in that debate that Democrats in this race are going to be able to use against him.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting
All
to see. And, and my one caution for Thurmond, I agree. Right now, he's got to be the fallback person, as people break away from Keisha, presumably. If they don't break away, she's going to win. I mean, that's the only pathway for any of the others is for her numbers to collapse. She's so close this far out that if she put on another 12 points, she's way closer to getting this thing wrapped up than anybody else. Thurmond's got to be able to take some away from her. The one thing I don't understand and would concern me if I was in Thurmond's camp is he has been CEO and before that school superintendent of DeKalb County, which is one of the biggest buckets of Democratic votes in the state. I mean, thousands, tens and tens and tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Democrat votes are coming out of DeKalb, I assume. So why is that alone not putting his number higher than it is? I don't have an answer to that. I'm not an expert on Democratic primary electorates, but that would be my concern. Like, we should have a bigger base than this because I've been around so long and there's so many Democrat voters in DeKalb who should be familiar with my name and should have a positive view of me.
Yeah, look, I can tell you the answer to that question. Out of 1,000 people that were surveyed, not all of them came from DeKalb. You know this, B. Rob, when you are hiring these pollsters, and by the way, this poll was done by the University of Georgia, so you have to get a good sample size that is a replica and description of what you predict the electorate will be. So if you were to just get all DeKalb or all Metro, based on the numbers that we just saw on Tuesday from the PSC race, we're seeing growth in those rural areas. You heard me say this last week, B. Rob. Out of the 159 counties in Georgia, Democrats made gains, right? They didn't win them all, but they were able to make gains as far as voter turnout in raw numbers and percentages in 157 of those counties. And so I think what the poll tried to do is give you a sample size of Metro, which is why I think part of the reason Keisha is high. Because I mean, Fulton, DeKalb, Clayton, Gwinnett, all those folks are in there. But once you got out to the rural areas, I think that's where Mike was able to do as well as he could do in the metro area. But also when you get into the rural areas, clearly he was able to pick up votes there because Jason and Jeff, are in single digits. And I guarantee you that Jeff Duncan, should be more concerned because he's a former lieutenant governor. Right now, he's in the Democratic primary.
Yeah,
but just that name alone, you're getting 4%. I think they rounded him up to 5, but we're like 4.5% in the poll. But look, Keisha's name recognition is high. Like we're gonna be honest here, but I think Thurman's name recognition is high statewide, and it will become higher in the metro area. But you're not going to be able to get that right now in a sample size poll of 1,000 people around the state.
I hear you. I just think there should be, that sample size should have a lot of DeKalb Democrats in it, or it's not going to be a good cross section of the state's Democratic electorate because there's just such a huge number here and in Fulton, certainly Gwinnett and Cobb as well. But DeKalb particularly, where Democrats get 85% of the vote in statewide elections and national elections, a lot of them should be in that poll answering that call or that online survey. And that would be my concern if I was Thurman's team.
Yeah, good point. Good point, both of you. More polling to come and more talk to come about this race and others. Thanks, guys, for checking in, as always, on this very, very cold day. The next time we talk, it'll be warmer, though. So we'll look forward to that.
Excellent. All right. Great show, guys. Thank y'all.